The majority of agricultural producers in developing countries face the same problem. Despite working hard to grow crops, they are unable to sell them for a high price, making it difficult to escape poverty. One solution is food value chain development. A food value chain is a system in which stakeholders collaborate throughout the entire chain of agricultural products from producer to consumer to add product value by enhancing productivity. JICA is assisting food value chain development in developing countries.
I'm JICA Senior Advisor Nakada Shunichi. There was a time when agricultural producers in Japan also faced poverty, but the development of food value chains has greatly improved their situation. JICA has leveraged Japan's experience to assist in food chain development in developing countries. This includes examples of producers whose income doubled in a short time. Food value chains also evolve along with factors like technological advances and consumer preferences. This video looks at agricultural support that responds to such changes.
1. What is food value chain development? Food value chain development can be described as a matching process to fill the gap between producers and consumers who have differing backgrounds and circumstances. First, the consumer side is characterized by major changes in needs, such as types of food and quality depending on economic growth and rising income. In contrast, it should be noted that the producer side is characterized by a possible inability to meet consumer needs due to production constraints created by natural conditions, including land, weather, and seasons.
The first step in matching producers and consumers is understanding their situations. To do that, we first need to understand the factors that affect producers and those that affect consumers. Let's take a closer look.
2. Factors affecting the supply side.
Let's start by looking at the factors that affect producers, or in other words, the supply side.
Agricultural regions can be classified into 5 types. We will base today's discussion on Japan, but these classifications can be broadly applied to Asia, Africa, and other regions. The first type is the urban agricultural zone. This is flat land with few hilly areas that extends downstream of a large river. Typically, this zone is favorable for the establishment of a major city. At the same time, the water and open plains create excellent conditions for agricultural production as well. In sections adjoining metropolitan areas in particular, proximity to areas where consumption is high leads to thriving production of horticultural crops, which have high added value. Next, we have the cereal zone, which is located at a distance from urban centers. This zone often takes advantage of wide open land to produce cereal crops. The third zone is the plateau vegetable zone. In general, compared with the lowlands, this zone often faces constraints in terms of land size and water access. However, it is also able to produce crops by leveraging its unique cool climate. Provided this zone has transport infrastructure such as roads, it has latent potential for becoming a major vegetable producer, like Nagano Prefecture in Japan. At higher elevations in the semi-mountainous zone, conditions make agriculture a challenge. In addition to sloping land that is not conducive to agriculture, this zone also faces distribution issues. Low winter temperatures and snow can make conditions in this region harsh, but the sale of special products such as fruit that can only be grown locally is also possible. However, agricultural mechanization on narrow sloping land is difficult, and working conditions are a major obstacle. Another major challenge is infrastructure for transporting harvested crops to high consumption areas. Finally, we have the mountainous agricultural zone, which faces even more severe conditions. Here, both productivity and market access are extremely difficult, and when combined with an aging population and depopulation, the survival of agriculture itself is at risk in certain areas.
Development of a food value chain must start with a good understanding of the factors that affect producers, mainly natural conditions, and include a survey of consumer needs to examine how to match the two sides. Next, let's examine the factors that affect consumers, or, in other words, the demand side.
3. Factors affecting the demand side.
As a premise for exploring factors that affect the demand side, let's look at the basic principles that determine consumption behavior. The key words are necessities and luxuries. Consumption behavior, a basic concept in economics, is easier to understand if goods are classified into necessities and luxuries.
Typical household consumption changes depending on income trends. First, let's look at a low-income household that cannot afford to purchase a wide variety of items. Most of the household's income is allocated to buying necessities, with food representing the largest portion. As income increases, most necessities can be purchased, and the basic necessities of life are met. At this point, the focus shifts to luxuries. When income increases to an adequate level and the household is no longer concerned about necessities, consumption aspirations center primarily on luxury items. The point of interest here is what luxuries are purchased and in what order of priority.
Next, let's take a look at consumption trends according to income, with the main focus on food purchases.
At the low-income stage, food accounts for the majority of household expenditure, with a particularly high proportion spent on staple foods. When the national economic level and the income of the majority of the population is low, the affordable and stable supply of staple foods becomes an important issue of national policy. When these government initiatives progress and the stable supply of food is achieved, things move to the next stage. This stage is characterized by slower growth of food expenditure in the household budget. The household gradually becomes able to buy food that it was previously unable to purchase. The last stage is where the income of the population reaches an adequate level. At this stage, people's interest turns to consumption of non-food luxuries. From the perspective of industrial structure, the proportion of agricultural production in the national economy shrinks.
The relationship between income and food purchases and changes in purchase behavior as income changes are common worldwide. Consumer needs do change. The awareness to properly understand this, perceive the changes, and flexibly reflect them in producer action is important in food value chain development.
4. The four major gaps.
While the concept of food value chain development has not always existed, Japan has been building a food value chain system for over 100 years. The system-building process revealed several major gaps between producers and consumers that need to be resolved. the information gap, the technical gap, the infrastructure gap, and the institutional gap.
The information gap refers to the inability of producers to grasp consumer needs and trends. Producers have limited opportunities to understand what crops should be produced, when, in what quantities, for what price, and from which production area to which consumption area those crops should be transported. The technical gap refers to a situation where technical constraints make it difficult for producers to meet the quality and price requirements of consumers. The infrastructure gap refers to the lack of basic infrastructure for post-harvest processing and storage, which is important for quality control. The institutional gap refers to several inadequacies of systems supporting the food value chain, including unified standards to achieve high-quality agricultural product distribution, mechanisms to avoid unfairness in trade between producers and distributors, support schemes to promote investment in the value chain, and basic statistics that enable planned production, shipping, and sales.
Let's summarize what we've learned so far. First, food value chain development is about working to bridge the gap between producers and consumers. It is important to remember that this gap changes greatly with the times. We have seen that food value chain development involves 4 specific gaps between producers and consumers that need to be bridged: the information gap, the technical gap, the infrastructure gap, and the institutional gap. In the next section, we will look at the status of and responses to these 4 gaps while referencing JICA case studies.
5-1. The information gap and responses to it.
Today, we will look at examples of JICA's technical cooperation to close the information gap. But first, let's look at the price information gap and the quality information gap, which are typical examples of the information gap.
Let's start with the price information gap. In farming villages in most countries, producers do not know how much their produce is being sold for in urban markets or at stores. As a result, they do not know what or when they should produce to increase sales. Furthermore, middlemen sometimes use this situation to unfairly suppress the buying price from producers and keep the bulk of the profit for themselves. Quality information is important in setting crop price, but aspects such as taste, level of residual agrochemicals, level of additives, and type of ingredients cannot be determined at stores by simply looking at products. When unnoticeable evaluation criteria are used, incorrect evaluations can affect price. Sellers may sometimes deliberately misrepresent the product to make greater profits.
Now let's move on to a specific example of responding to the information gap. This involves a project called SHEP, undertaken by JICA, mainly in African countries.
SHEP is an acronym for Smallholder Horticulture Empowerment and Promotion, and is an approach that promotes market-oriented agriculture. A major feature of SHEP is that producers themselves conduct market surveys and implement market-oriented agriculture based on collected information. Traditionally, in most villages in developing countries, the criteria for what farmers grow is based on 2 sources of information: the farming carried out by parents and grandparents, and the production status of neighboring farmers. The problem here is that while market needs are actually subject to dynamic change, the information possessed by the producer is limited to past history. Under the SHEP approach, producers first visit the local market. They gain information from middlemen and wholesalers, not just about price, but about required quality and quantity, price fluctuations, and top-selling products. They collate the information, and through discussion, the producers themselves come to an understanding of who should supply what items, when, in what quantity, at what level of quality, and for what price. This process transforms the mindset from grow and sell to grow to sell. Mr. Peter Orangi is a government official involved in the SHEP program in Kenya.
Through the SHEP project in Kenya, the situation has tremendously changed. The income levels have actually doubled, and the latest figure is the farmers are able to get an average of 56,000 Kenya shillings per season from horticultural farming, and this has improved their disposable incomes, and therefore their living standards has improved, and they are able to actually access some of the basic needs they could not afford before, like they have improved nutrition, they have been able to improve their housing. In terms of education, they have been able to take their children to better schools, and even some of the farmers have actually been able to improve their education levels. And the productivity has quite improved. There is improved quality in produce because they are focusing on the market and based on the market demand. The quantities have improved because now they are practicing farming business, and generally the farmers are on a path to competing in a business environment.
The SHEP project introduced here is an approach that functions well as a small-scale value chain where the consumers and producers are in close proximity. In value chains that are longer and more complex, it is also important to develop distribution networks that include market information systems and infrastructure. 5-2. The technical gap and responses to it.
The technical gap is wide-ranging, but today we will examine one typical example: the establishment of a year-round supply system for agricultural products and required technology.
The distribution of agricultural products is characterized by three main features. 1. Production and harvesting are limited to certain periods or seasons of the year. 2. The storage period is extremely short. And 3. Once planting has occurred, the production process cannot be stopped and resumed in response to market demand. For these reasons, agricultural products inevitably suffer seasonal or annual imbalance between supply and demand, which can cause price fluctuations. In the 1960s, the biggest problem facing producers in most agricultural regions in Japan was indeed a seasonal supply and demand imbalance, which in turn caused price fluctuations.
At the time, producers' incomes were impacted by market prices that could not be forecast and were very unstable compared to today. If we take tomatoes as an example, production quantities increased considerably in the 1960s. However, 90% of the total production was concentrated in the 3 months between June and September, so the winter price was about 1.6 times the summer price. Let's look at 3 technical initiatives undertaken in the production areas to address this underlying problem.
The first is greenhouse cultivation. The introduction of greenhouse cultivation allowed producers to control temperature and humidity, two very important conditions for agricultural production. This also enabled the timing of production and shipping to be adjusted. In the 1970s and 1980s, a wide range of greenhouse cultivation technology was devised and rapidly spread nationwide. The second is breed improvement. Diverse varieties of horticultural products that enabled early maturing or late maturing were developed and popularized during Japan's high economic growth period. The production system that combined these diverse varieties, cultivation techniques, and greenhouse cultivation was called a cropping model. Various cropping models were developed that greatly extended the supply period for major crops. The third technology is called relay production. One of Japan's unique features is a long landmass in a largely north-south direction, with different temperature zones depending on latitude and topography. Taking advantage of this, nationwide production areas and producers constructed a network with distributors. They established a system of production where shipping times were slightly staggered. This resulted in stable shipping throughout the year from nationwide production areas and enabled mutual profitability while reducing competition. Against a backdrop of progress in distribution infrastructure and technologies, this network has expanded since the 1980s.
Over time, a series of technologies was introduced. As we saw in the tomato example, these technologies enabled the shipping period to be widely expanded from 3 to 10 months, bringing the price fluctuation down to 1.2 times between seasons. Thanks to these initiatives, planned production and high value adding of crops greatly contributed to the stabilization of producer income. This also led to various benefits for consumers, including year-round access to agricultural products.
5-3. The infrastructure gap and responses to it.
Now let's turn to the infrastructure gap and responses to it. As previously explained, agricultural products are characterized by perishability, seasonal gaps in supply and demand, and conspicuous price fluctuations. The development of food processing technologies and cold chain distribution systems became important options for resolving such issues.
Immediately following World War II, Japan suffered food shortages and faced serious food quality and quantity issues. Protein consumption posed a particularly serious problem. Let's look at the progression of protein sources consumed by the Japanese people. Comparing 1948 with 1961, two protein sources contributed to protein consumption during the post-war Reconstruction period: soybeans and fish. Japan is blessed with abundant marine resources, so compared to meat, fish was a relatively inexpensive food. However, cold chains were still not fully operational, so freshness could not be maintained when transporting over long distances. This meant that compared to the coastal regions, there was less fish consumption in the interior. Among harvested fish, the flesh of the walleye pollock deteriorated quickly, so the roe was used while the flesh was mostly discarded. It was food processing that changed this situation. A technology for producing frozen fish cakes developed in 1959 dramatically transformed the market. The establishment of processing technology to extend the storage period of the flesh of the walleye pollock, which was underutilized despite its catch size, significantly extended the scope of distribution. This fish came to be used as a raw material for fish sausage. This technology contributed to the improvement of the nation's nutrition, including school lunches, as a source of affordable protein with a long storage life. Meanwhile, the Japanese government made considerable efforts towards the development of cold chain systems. In 1965, the government encouraged a national cold chain system rollout and subsequently provided subsidies and technical guidance to help realize this. As a result, in the 30-year period from 1970, frozen storage warehouse capacity more than doubled. Upstream of the distribution system, frozen storage warehouses were introduced, and downstream at the household level, refrigerators and microwave ovens gained popularity. The result was not just greater consumption of fish, but also of meat and dairy products, while cooked and semi-processed foods such as frozen vegetables and frozen meals also started being consumed at home. Japan's food culture itself changed considerably with the development of cold chain storage. Mr. Suzuki Toru is an expert in freezing technology and cold chain systems.
The important aspect of cold chain creation in Japan was that the government took the lead, and various industry stakeholders developed comprehensive cold chain systems simultaneously. But the way cold chain systems are being created with development assistance in developing countries, only certain parts are being developed, and only certain machinery is being introduced. So the overall chain is incomplete. In my opinion, it's best to have a person, like a consultant, or an organization in place that can oversee the entire chain. It can just be a simple chain, but it is vital that this chain be complete. In the future, countries building cold chains should not suddenly build complex ones, but start from a single, simple one. I think it's a better way to then increase the number of those simple chains. Producing a lot of affordable agricultural products in your own country means that your country has resources. Those resources require the creation of a distribution network. I believe that by doing this, the demand will follow. I think that creating cold chain systems and value chains gives farmers and fishermen in developing countries the opportunity to further enrich their lives.
5-4 The institutional gap and responses to it.
Finally, the institutional gap and responses to it. Ultimately, it is the private sector that operates the food value chain. The government's role is providing support to ensure that private sector activities progress smoothly. There are two cases that warrant government intervention. One is the creation of a mechanism to support transparent and fair pricing, and the other is the regulation of food quality standards and laws. Let's take a look at an example of creating a mechanism to support transparent and fair pricing. This example of wholesale market regulation in Japan dates back about 100 years and has majorly impacted current agricultural product distribution.
In early 20th century Japan, a small number of large-scale rice wholesalers monopolized the rice market in each region. The wholesalers learned that Japan was dispatching troops to Siberia during the Russian Civil War. Anticipating a price increase for rice, they devised a strategy not to sell rice until the price rose. When the price of rice eventually increased throughout the country, desperate citizens staged nationwide protests that eventually escalated into riots. They attacked the wholesalers' warehouses and stole the rice.
The government took this situation seriously and introduced a system that strictly regulated the rice market operating under the private sector. Thus, the Wholesale Market Act, which made the trading system transparent and fair, was introduced.
The Wholesale Market Act has two main features: auctions and commission-based sales. First, auctions. Traditional rice trading involved separate transactions between middlemen and rice wholesalers, who set the purchase price together. Only traders could see the details, and bribery and unfair dealings were rampant. Introducing auctions where stakeholders simultaneously participate in the transaction of rice created an environment where such unfair dealings could not take place. Next, commission-based sales. Under traditional separate transactions, the difference between the wholesale price and the retail price was profit that all went to the distributor. This meant that general wholesalers and rice wholesalers were constantly searching for ways to buy low and sell high. Through the introduction of a commission-based sales system, the system changed to one where the difference between the purchase price and selling price became the producer's profit, while the wholesaler's profit came from a commission fee on that sale multiplied by a fixed ratio. The introduction of a commission-based sales system prevented wholesalers from profiting through unfair price manipulation.
Even today, agricultural product transactions in developing countries typically take the form of producers accepting prices that are unilaterally decided by middlemen. Making major institutional reforms, such as those in Japan, to change the situation is not easy. It is important to gradually introduce elements that are achievable. Start by developing a price information system in the market to make transactions more visible to all. Then, support farmer groups to improve producers' price negotiating capacity. We have not looked at this in detail in this video, but an important role of the government is to determine unified quality and shipping standards, and then monitor the market to eliminate non-compliant products. As mentioned earlier, certain food quality elements such as taste, safety, and area of production cannot be judged visually. There are also numerous instances where distributors have faked labeling to increase the price. If governments set common standards and control non-compliant products, then good products will be set at good prices, adding value to agricultural products and food transactions. We have covered a number of topics in this video, but the most important message we want to convey is this: consumer needs change. Producers may not notice these changes or be unable to adequately respond to them, resulting in a supply and demand mismatch that leads to the loss of profit. Such examples can be seen worldwide. Market changes like these are particularly noticeable during the transition from being a low-income country to a middle-income one. Developing countries in such situations have significant opportunities to increase income through agriculture. The information, technical infrastructure, and institutional gaps. Today, we have covered only a few examples of these, but we hope that they will provide reference points for your own country to consider initiatives that suit your unique circumstances.